Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to the newest and greatest podcast in Gainesville. Welcome to the new you. My name is Larry Green. I am the Executive and Clinical Director here at the Gainesville Community Counseling Center, and today we are joined by Ezra Stone, LCSW, right?
Yes.
And we're glad to have you. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. In a little while, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and talk about your practice and some issues that you work on. But the purpose of this podcast is to introduce the community to local clinicians, to address issues related to mental health. We provide mindfulness tips of the week. We talk about politics. We talk about religion. We talk about anything and everything. And we welcome you to send in your questions. You can find us on the web at www.gainesvillecounselingcenter.com. Or you can give us a call at 352-448-9120. And so we hope that you will subscribe to the podcast. You'll find it on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. And you can find us on YouTube. And we hope that you'll hit that subscribe button down there and share it with your friends. So we do mental health counseling for low-income communities, and so we offer sliding scale fees going down to 50, and we actually have a program now where we can offer free counseling for a couple of years for people who qualify for it. So if you are someone who doesn't have insurance or has insurance that really sucks, like most insurances do, or you just don't have the resources to pay for counseling and you need it, give us a call and we can get you set up with a therapist here. Again, it's 352-448-9120 or GainesvilleCounselingCenter.com. So here at the center, we believe in mindfulness as an approach to many things that we face, and so we incorporate it into our work here at the center. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ezra and ask Ezra and put Ezra on the spot. Do you have a mindfulness activity that you like to do with your clients or yourself?
Yes, thanks, Larry. I absolutely do. This past couple of weeks, I've been using a lot of mindfulness with my clients, and an exercise that folks are really enjoying is the leaves on a stream visualization.
Leaves on the stream.
Yeah.
So tell us about it.
So for this exercise, you just want to sit comfortably, you want to relax your breathing, and start to imagine a really peaceful place by a moving body of water. And we're lucky to live in North Florida where we have lots of great examples to draw from. Right. And you just work on kind of sitting, noticing your breathing, visualizing this peaceful place. And every time thoughts pop up, you just imagine that those thoughts are leaves and let them drift away down the stream. So we're not necessarily trying to clear our mind or, not think about anything. That can be pretty daunting for people, but we're just working on recognizing what's going on in our brain and then kind of letting it pass by. And I found that this is really helpful for people who deal with, obsessive thoughts or ruminating or feeling very worried. And we just talk about the purpose of the exercise is to notice your thoughts and then bring, let them drift away.
Right. I think a lot of folks think you have to empty your mind at all times if you're doing mindfulness and do that Zen Buddha kind of Om kind of a thing.
And that's a tall order for most of us.
Yes, right. And so I remember my wife when I was in seminary, she went to a class on spirituality, and the instructor said, "Now empty your mind." And my wife sat there for like 10 minutes and then got up and walked out and came home early, and I was like, "What's the matter?" She said, "I suck at spirituality. I can't do the empty your mind thing."
Goodness.
And I was like, I don't know anybody who really can, so you're kind of normal, right?
Yeah.
And so with mindfulness, it's kind of envisioning and recognizing that thought. And why is it important to recognize and acknowledge that the thought is there?
Yeah, well, in therapy, and I use a lot of DBT in my practice, so we're really kind of always playing with, what are we accepting and what are we changing and what do we have to accept in order to change. And I think this exercise is a great way to do that. We're acknowledging what is happening for us, but then we're working on kindly shifting our attention back to the present. And every time we do that, we get better at doing that.
Right. And for those who don't know, DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy. And I refer to it as CBT on steroids with a little bit of mindfulness, and a lot of mindfulness in there.
Yeah.
Good. So Ezra, you and I have not met. We've talked on the interwebs via email. So tell me a little bit about you and your practice and how you got here to Gainesville.
Yeah, great. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I studied anthropology, of all things, in my undergraduate.
Oh.
Ended up doing a research project at a homeless shelter, and that's what got me interested in, in social work and in human services. And anthropology focuses on kind of the big picture of communities and cultures. But what really stuck out to me working there was also how much people needed, help and support and skills on an individual and a family level. So I ended up going on to study social work through Florida State University. When I was in school, though, they had a part-time program that met here in Gainesville on the weekends. So that was really fun. I got to go to FSU while sitting in the UF Health Sciences Library. So I studied social work. I've worked in domestic violence. I've worked in community mental health. I've worked with kids and youth in different settings. And for the last year and a half, I've been doing private practice therapy. And I work mostly with trans people and with a lot of college-age people.
Fantastic.
So it's really fun.
I actually pushed the social work program through Florida State because they do have the local option to do it here. So I think it's a great program. And my dad went to FSU, and he bemoans the fact that we live in Florida and live in Gainesville. He says that's horrible.
Well, there's a lot about Florida that is horrible.
That is true. We'll get into a lot of that.
Gainesville is a sweet place to live.
It is.
Really
now, are you from Gainesville originally?
No, I grew up in Ormond Beach near Daytona. But Gainesville seemed to be a nice, progressive place to live. College town vibes, but a lot of good nature for hiking and swimming and being outdoors and stuff like that.
Do you still have family in Ormond?
I do, yeah. My mom lives over there.
And how did she do during the storm?
She was okay. Her laundry room flooded, but she cleaned it up pretty quickly and didn't lose power for too long.
Yeah, the pictures of the A1A were just amazing.
Yeah.
And they got them rebuilt like overnight. I'm like, I'm not driving on that until I find other people who can test it before I go. So good. Well, we're glad to have you here. So tell us the clients that you work with. You work a lot with the trans community, with college students, and what sort of, if you had to pick your issues that you work with most, what are you working with?
Okay, great question. Yeah, working with so many young adults, we're dealing with a lot of adjustment reactions, a lot of getting used to college or getting ready to graduate or finding yourself out in the workforce for the first time. So we're doing that, kind of stage of life work.
Right.
And then when we add in, LGBT issues, family issues, everything that's going on politically, some of those more macro issues also come into play. So it's, it's like, sometimes we refer to it as like sort of playing on hard mode. It's like, it's hard enough to be 22, but then, you're transitioning and the governor hates you and, your family thinks you're going to hell. And it's like,
That's a lot of shit.
That's a lot of shit.
Absolutely.
So it's a great stage of life to get some therapy, because if you really work on building those skills for handling things, it serves you throughout the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into the Don't Say Gay bill in a little bit, but tell us how would folks get in touch with you if they wanted to set up an appointment with you?
Oh, sure. So I have a website. It's stoneTherapyandConsulting. Either .net or .com. There is another Stone Therapy and something that is located elsewhere in the state. I'm hoping that they don't find out and send me a cease and desist letter that my business name is very similar to theirs. But you can find me by Googling me. I've got an email address, ezrastone.lcsw@gmail.com. So I see clients for individual therapy. I see clients for assessments if they need a diagnosis of gender dysphoria for top surgery, or surgeries or medical procedures. So I do those also. Just sometimes I call that like a little gender consult. We meet once, talk about their dysphoria, talk about the surgery that they're trying to have. And that's really important to me to be able to do those in a single assessment. In the past, people have been held to weeks or months or years of therapy before being able to access medical transition.
Right. Which is so antiquated, because there's nothing legally requiring a letter or any sort of therapy related to transitioning, but the doctors have held on to that tradition, right? And I think it's more of a CYA thing than anything.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And there's a great book called, now I have to remember the name, on being trans and feeling bad. And one of the things they talk about a lot in there is, you know, the medical gatekeeping, and in fact the whole requirement of getting a psychologist to sign off on someone's transition was totally just a CYA from the doctors. And really it was partially because the doctors weren't very skilled at doing these procedures and doing these surgeries, so they, you know, were like, well, just in case like I fuck up and you don't like it, you know, we can say the psychologist signed off. So, and I always like to validate that and like explain that to clients that like I don't think you need a diagnosis to be trans. Like I wish this was not the system that we live in. But going back to those DBT skills, you know, we do that radical acceptance and we say, all right, this is the world we live in. How are we going to live in it?
Right.
And we write their letter and send them on their way to get surgery.
Exactly. Now, so you do telehealth and you do in-person, and so you were saying earlier that your in-person is at the Pride Center? Yeah, so tell us a little bit about the Pride Center and how you got involved with them.
Definitely, yeah. So the Pride Center is an awesome local resource, and the Pride Center is, in fact, getting a lot busier these days. It was hard during the pandemic. There wasn't a lot happening in person, but the Pride Community Center is an LGBT community center that we have here in Gainesville. There are events throughout the month, every month. I can read the list of events in a moment. They've also got drop-in hours on Monday evenings from 7 to 9 and Saturdays from 2 to 4. So if folks just want to learn about the community, talk to someone who's part of the community. There's a great library of LGBT books. There's a lot of cool ephemera. There's some sections of the AIDS quilt. It's a really special place. So do you want to hear about some of the upcoming events?
Tell us.
Awesome. So I have a whole list because it's a lot.
That's fine.
So there's an adult social group that started up. And if you want to learn about that, I think that meets once a week or a couple of times a month. You can check out the Pride Center online for details about those meetings. There is a book club that meets the third Sunday of each month. There is a community connections group that happens the first Tuesday of each month. There's a couple of 12-step meetings at the Pride Center. There's a Crystal Meth Anonymous group that meets on Wednesdays at 7, and a Free to Be AA group that meets every Sunday at 7. The Gainesville Area AIDS Project supplies weekly meals and hygiene items to people with HIV and AIDS in the community. So that's a great group to get involved in if people want to, you know, do some service or do a supply drive. There is a group Quit to help people stop using tobacco that meets at the Pride Center. There's free HIV testing once a month on the third Thursday of each month. There is a Pride student meetup for middle and high school students. That is, I think that you need to reach out for the specific information because that is not on my list. I think that group just got started up recently. There is a seniors group for people 50 and older, and there's a group that I run called Rainbow Resilience, which is a mental health discussion group. And that group meets the third Thursday of each month. The third Saturday of each month.
All right. Well, tell us about that program that you're running.
Yeah, so that's it's been really fun so far. We started that up early in the summer. And basically it's just, you know, it's free, open to the community, and every month we just have a discussion about some topic related to mental health and LGBT issues. So we've talked about dealing with anger, we've talked about self-care, we've talked about coping with things that are going on politically, and it's just a really nice time to, you know, to connect with peers, excuse me, and to connect with peers, meet new people. And one of the things that we've talked about in the group and I end up talking to my clients about is that it's hard to make friends when you're an adult. You know, and especially if you don't drink or you don't party or, you know, you're on the, you know, the other side of your mid-20s. It's hard to figure out how to get out there and meet people. So having these kind of, you know, structured, sober social activities for people, I think is really beneficial, especially for those of us who are anxious or, you know, may, you know, not have the easiest time just chatting and making small talk in a bar or something.
So what are some of the bigger challenges facing the LGBTQIA plus population as it pertains to mental health right now?
Yeah, so there is a lot, you know, in addition to whatever stage of life issues that people might be dealing with, or, you know, big life changes like transitions. You know, we've got a lot going on in Florida right now related to, you know, attacks on trans healthcare and the Don't Say Gay bill. And, even if people are not directly impacted by that legislation, it still has a huge impact on our mental health.
Sure.
To live in a state where, these policies are being passed, these, politicians are making these public statements, we're being accused of being groomers by the governor's office. Right. That takes a real toll on people's sense of safety and people's sense of security. And there's a lot of research that corroborates that as if we needed it.
Right. Yeah, we all know it.
Right, we all know it, and kind of like we were talking about before, it's good to have the data, right? To be able to say, and also to be able to show our clients that this isn't just like you're weak and you can't handle it. It's like it is demonstrated that when we live under these conditions, it is harder to thrive.
Right.
So we call that the minority stress model.
Yep.
Recognizing that people who are in minority groups or in marginalized groups face higher levels of stress related to actual experiences of discrimination, the fear of being discriminated against or harmed, and hearing those stories from our friends and peers.
Yeah, it's that vicarious part too that Definitely. Is pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the legislation, mm-hmm. right? You've got the Don't Say Gay bill, even though they will say nowhere in there does it say Don't Say Gay, but the effect is mm-hmm. that we are diverting attention away from a population mm-hmm. that is part of our that is part of our life, and so the byproduct is you're teaching people not to say gay mm-hmm. to not just the earlier kids as it's proposed in the bill, mm-hmm. but the negative effect, and we've seen it here in Alachua County already, mm-hmm. is that teachers, even in high school, are very afraid to address any issues related to gender or sexuality. Are you seeing that as well mm-hmm. within your population?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that, GSAs and, gender sexuality alliances and student groups are, being discouraged, or kids are afraid to go to them. Mm-hmm. Teachers being told or being implied, or them feeling like they need to take down, any kind of safe place stickers or advocacy or, ally right. kind of markings that they might have in their classrooms. So it's definitely had a really big impact on people. And, then the confusion of, everybody is afraid of getting in trouble, but nobody knows what exactly they're actually even supposed to be doing. It seems like it's creating a lot of confusion, which is why I think it's great that the Pride Center is doing a group for middle and high school students. So there are places, for queer and trans and questioning young people to meet up outside of their schools.
Right. Well, and that's why we're also going to be offering a group session for high school, maybe middle.
Oh, awesome.
I don't remember, but
under 18.
Under 18s, because of the negative effects that we're seeing here in our practice for our population of clients that identify as LGBTQIA plus. Mm-hmm. And so that we're seeing a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. We're seeing a lot of fear mm-hmm. Within that population that the straight community by and large has no concept of, mm-hmm. right? And if anyway, so we can go on and on about that. So what are some ways that parents can help their kids who are in school and are seeing these ally stickers being taken down and are living within that context and not knowing who's safe, who's not safe? What are some things parents can do to help their child?
That's $1 million question, isn't it?
I get $1 million, yes.
Yeah, so I think, parents have a great opportunity right now to, to be supportive of their own children, to signal in whatever ways they can their support of other people's children who might not be getting that at home or at school. And if school is becoming more of a hostile place for mm-hmm. queer and trans young people, that, parents can help their kids and their kids' friends get involved, in groups and seek out support. And just provide some role modeling
sure.
of what adults, how adults can be. Because I think that's really important for kids if they're seeing, in their homes or their schools that these issues are being silenced, that they are at least able to get a counterpoint from, Susie's moms or,
right.
Jimmy from church or whoever.
Yeah. So just being that resource and supportive system. I think sometimes parents think they have to have all the answers. And what I tell them is, no, you don't. It's okay to say I don't know, but we can find out together what those answers
Absolutely.
are. The major population that I get worried about are those kids who are not quite sure, and they're still discovering themselves,
Yeah.
and don't have that avenue now to turn to a supportive teacher, or to turn to anyone in the school system, really. So the fact that if they do come out, even to a counselor at school, they're now required to divulge that information to parents. What will that do you think, to these kids who are struggling with, am I gay, am I bi, am I trans, what am I?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can create really dangerous situations. We know from the research that especially trans and non-binary young people are at very high risks of suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts. And we also know that validating and confirming and affirming people's gender identities really decreases those risks. So there definitely are a lot of young people that are at risk with their mental health and at risk for their safety. And every time they see those things that are happening in the media, they see what's happening in politics, that reinforces a sense of hopelessness. And
Right.
we know from therapy that a sense of hopelessness is really dangerous.
Sure. Because when you lose that hope, then you don't see an avenue out,
Right.
or a way forward. And it doesn't help that the state medical board now has come out with their policy banning anything related to transition medically for, was it anyone under 18? Is that what it is?
I believe so, yeah.
That's incredible to me. And so their excuses are, and their decision, I don't know if you listened to any of the testimony or heard about any of the testimony, but all of their testimony came from proponents of banning transitional medication and procedures, and all of it was based off of faulty science, right? So, what I always tell parents is, are there dangers related to transition? Yeah, they're medically, when you're introducing stuff into the body, there's always the potential of some danger. But by and large, transitioning medically is safe. Puberty blockers are safe. It's not like it's a permanent thing.
Right.
It can be reversed. But once again, that's the state saying to this population, you don't know what you're doing. You're just going through a phase. And one of the things they kept pointing out was that if we give these kids time, over time, they will identify that they were just in a phase. And I giggle at that, because the reality is, no, it wasn't that they decided it was just a phase. It was that they decided it's not safe to truly identify who I am to anybody. But the other side sees that as, oh, they just came out of a transition. They just came out of a phase of life. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, this idea of a phase, if your kid were going through a phase, okay, kids go through phases. Like, you don't stop your kid from playing baseball because it's just a phase and they're not going to be in the major leagues. You let your kids experiment and learn about themselves, and you support them in developing their interests and their passions and who they are. And, it is very, very infrequent that people detransition, especially people who've experienced dysphoria after puberty. And so on the very slim chance that your kid does not decide to transition after all, okay, are you going to be nice to them and show them that you support them experimenting and learning about themselves? Or are you going to say, oh, I'm going to bully you now just in case you're not sure?
Right.
That sends a really horrible message. And, we know from the data that most trans people keep being trans.
Right.
And we can't make people stop being trans by denying them transition.
Right.
We shove people in the closet so that they can feel safer, so that they can survive. But, a lot of those people, and I have met clients and worked with clients who tried to come out in early adolescence, went back in the closet and came back out in their early 20s.
Sure.
When they had more autonomy.
Right. They could make their own decisions.
Absolutely, and they had their own money.
And their safety and their own place to live and that sort of stuff. Yeah. It's also kind of comical to me that the only piece of data that the opponents use related to transition is the study out of Sweden, which there was one piece in there that seemed to highlight the fact that transitioning would lead to a higher incidence rate of suicide. And so they keep saying that, right? They'll push that one bit of information in that report, in that study. However, the author of that study has repeatedly come out and said that's not what the study says. What the study says is that the lack of support systems after transition does have a negative impact on people's health. But the same can be true for everybody, right? It's not just transitioning. If you have an at-risk youth who's straight and doesn't have that support system, there's a higher rate of suicide in that population as well. But it's amazing how they twist and they lie and they manipulate with these studies.
Yeah.
And then we get to deal with that on a local level. How does the Pride Center address those issues or politic around those issues, or do they?
Well, let's see. I mean, I think the big things that the Pride Center does is, create community spaces and host, ways for people to get together and to organize. One amazing thing that the Pride Center did, I have to flip my paper over so I can get my stats about this, is, producing those narratives that run counter to what certain people in the public eye are saying about the queer community. And so, for instance, the Pride Festival that happened here in Gainesville last month, there were 98 vendors, all-day entertainment, and an estimated 6,000 people who came.
Oh, wow.
So I think, making those spaces where people can get together, where people can celebrate, where people can learn about what's going on in the community, connect with folks who are like-minded, that's really key. Support is really key for all of our survival, right? We don't live under bell jars. We don't live on islands. Like, we live in community. And so being able to connect with others, I think, is really important for our mental health and for our ability to do activism and organizing. And going back to the Pride Festival, all of that was done by a board of 8 people.
Wow.
So
it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and so.
Now, are you on the board?
I am not on the board. No, I am.
Would you like to be? I'll nominate you. That was a big sigh, Ezra.
I've got a lot on my plate.
Is that a no?
That is a no. No, I'm not ready to be on anybody's board right now. But I was specifically asked to say that if there were more board members and more people, more chairs and more volunteers, the sky's the limit.
Yes.
That's what Faith, the treasurer, said. So I might not have the capacity to be on the board of the Pride Center, but they definitely are looking for more people to get involved and help plan community events. And network and keeping a resource to the community.
Well, I think the Pride Center is really under transition right now. For years you had Terry, who was there and ran everything and did everything, and was just a beast when it came to the politics. And I think one of the transitional pieces that the Pride Center is facing now is, how do you take everything Terry did and have other people do it? Like the festival has historically been a Terry thing, and he kind of directed everything, and it was nice to see the board working together to make it happen. And I'm sure for them it was a new learning opportunity, because everything was really in Terry's head. And so when he died, that kind of went alongside, but I think they did a fantastic job. And
it was a really exciting day.
Yeah,
so
it was
great to see so many,
especially after 2 years of being gone. And then having the entertainment throughout the day, I think, was fabulous. And doing that, so I did miss the parade. I would not have walked, but I missed the parade. But I think we were the only Pride Festival in the northern part of the state that did not have protesters.
Wow.
Orlando had protesters, Jacksonville had protesters, Ocala had protesters. In Gainesville, we were nice and peaceful, which I think speaks volumes to this area,
Yeah.
and folks knowing that if they had shown up, they would have been run off pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the Pride Center has experienced some hate of its own recently, and how are they recovering from that?
Yeah, so the Pride Center is well on their way to repairing the damage from the vandalism that happened last month. There's been a ton of support that's come from our local community and from around the country. So there were over 600 donations that came in from around the country.
Fantastic.
Showing their support, showing their solidarity.
Yeah.
And the Pride Center is still active and is going to keep being active, and keep doing what they're doing. And I'm really excited to be a part of it and to be involved there.
Yeah, that was a shock to the community. I know they weren't the only targets that weekend, but it was certainly the timing of it was very questionable. So that just highlights the fact that it's not just individuals; it's organizations
Mm-hmm.
that are supportive.
Yeah.
What is the right call it? The pushing the gay agenda. Which, by the way, did you know there's a show? Is it Netflix or is it? It's called The Gay Agenda, and it's a series of short films that talks about the gay agenda. I've yet to watch it. I didn't know there was an agenda that the gay community had, but there seems to be an agenda that the right thinks that they have, right? Like it's taken them now to drag queens.
Right.
Like, I didn't realize that drag queens were really bad for kids. I didn't realize that it was bad for them to read to kids. But now they're trying to criminalize taking your kid to a family-friendly drag show.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous, and I will show my cards. I'm 35 years old. I was starting high school around 9/11, so I was a teenager during sort of the early 2000s, kind of the conservative era.
Mm-hmm.
And so this does seem like sort of the next generation of that gay panic that happened in the 80s, that happened in the early 2000s, and now it's really focused around trans people and acting as if there's this these like radical cyborgs that are trying to like make everybody be these like genderless,
yes,
automatons, using some really nasty and ugly language.
Sure.
And there have always been queer people, there have always been trans people, and there will continue to be queer and trans people. And really the gay agenda or the trans agenda is be nice,
leave us alone,
go to
let us
therapy,
live.
mind your own business.
Yeah, I have yet to meet a trans person that has said, "Hey, why don't you convert to our way of life?"
Yeah, and that's also what's really confusing about the people on the far right who think that there's sort of this social contagion. It's like, do you know that it's hard to transition? It's hard to be trans.
They know that because they make the rules.
So yeah, it's really it's easy to get down about
Sure.
all of that. I think it's helpful to try to keep a sense of humor about it. Make jokes. Connect with friends and peers, do activism, read about trans history. I find that to be really helpful and
It's empowering.
Absolutely. It's easy. If we let those people get in our heads and they make they're trying to say this is a brand new made up thing that like the kids are trying to turn into cats now or whatever. It's I think really helpful to look at our history and just remember all the ways there have always been trans people, and people have always figured out how to be their true selves,
Right.
even when it's been really hard and really dangerous.
Yeah. Did you hear the rumor about cats in schools?
Not only have I heard the rumor, I was this summer I went to Tallahassee for one of the Medicaid hearings, and somebody stood up and tried to say that, I believe she said her daughter was a school teacher and her daughter was being forced to have a litter box in the classroom for one of the students, and it just
How stupid is that?
it makes again, have you ever been in an elementary school classroom? Like
I used to teach elementary.
Okay, so you never had a litter box, did you?
No, I had my own bathroom. They could go to the bathroom.
Okay, that's nice.
And maybe they scratched. I don't know, but it's farcical to me. Like,
right, and it's the same kind of argument where people used to say, if we have gay marriage, next somebody's going to marry their dog. You know, and
yes.
It's just another way to compare queer and trans people to animals,
right?
And to make us seem ridiculous.
Well, that goes beyond that. It makes the community almost a poison, right? And I think that's horrific, you know, because when you look at the far right, you know, a majority of them claim to be these very good, faithful Christian people, but the byproduct of their faith is that they demonize and ostracize and throw rocks at a population that they know nothing about, right? And they misread scripture and all that other stuff. So, and then they take that and then they use that philosophy and that theology and all that biblical stuff, and they make laws based on that. I can go on for days about that, but what are some ways that we might be able to do some political work to counterbalance some of the negative stuff that's coming out of Tallahassee?
Yeah, so I think getting involved with any of our community organizations is a great place to start. You know, there's lobby days coming up in, you know, after the new year. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to build community and to get involved. So we've got 2 local trans organizations. We've got both Tranquility and the Unspoken Treasure Society. Both groups are really active in the community. PFLAG is a great way for families and friends of queer and trans people to learn more about LGBT issues and get involved.
Now, are they back up and running?
They are back up and running. They're meeting at the Pride Center. It is on the other side of my sheet. So PFLAG meets the 3rd Tuesday of each month at 7 o'clock at the Pride Center. And I know some of the folks that are involved in that group. It's a really great way for, you know, for family members to learn more. You know, your kid comes out or your spouse says they want to transition. And it's a great way to learn more and to get involved. And they've been really active in the community recently. They were active at Pride and really, really nice group of folks. So I think that's probably a really great place to start, is to get in touch with one of the organizations that's active, you know, meet people that are doing activism, and kind of take it from there. We think we need to see what's happening next politically, and people can start to organize around what to do next.
Yeah. Well, you know, Equality Florida is very active in the political realm and staying on top of that. So if you're somebody who wants to know more information about what's going on, that's probably the best resource, because they put it on the website, the upcoming legislative actions that are being considered. And locally, you know, I guess it's about 4 years ago now, we organized the groups about you know, banning conversion therapy by licensed individuals. Oddly, to my surprise, we haven't been sued yet. Like Tampa, their ordinance was overturned. I think last year, the year before, and there's a couple others, but we have not experienced that here, and I'm glad that hasn't happened. But you know, what is conversion therapy, if you had to describe it?
Yeah, so I would say that conversion therapy is any therapy that tries to change somebody's gender identity or somebody's sexual orientation, and even some that are, you know, going by different names. You know, I think there's, you know, there have been movements to create a form of therapy that's like watchful waiting, or I forget the exact word that they use, but sort of, you know, challenging a little bit, or pathologizing, right? You know, kind of assuming that a person's coming into therapy because there's some deep shit that they need to resolve, and that's why they think they're gay. But really they have daddy issues, or they have trauma they haven't addressed or something. You know, so I would say any therapy that takes somebody's gender identity or someone's sexuality as, you know, as pathological or as something to be changed, I would consider that to be conversion therapy. And we've seen from the evidence, I've seen in my clinical practice that that's really harmful, and especially that often comes from a religious standpoint. Queer and trans people are taken to a religious leader or a religiously aligned counselor to try and change themselves, and that does a lot of damage to people trying to be changed like that, because that's not how gender identity and sexuality works.
Right.
And for people who grew up in a religious community, that can really be damaging for somebody's sense of faith and their spirituality and their ability to, connect with a spirituality or a religion. So I always, I've had clients who've been in, especially when they were younger, been in some form of conversion therapy. And I always like to tell them, like, I'm so glad you came back to therapy, because it's brave to come back.
Right.
It doesn't have to be like this. Like, now you're here, and now we can work on this.
Right.
You can work on living the best life for yourself and not trying to change yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of one of the reasons I like being in our location that we're at within a quote-unquote church building, is that one of the positive experiences that we've had continuously is within the LGBTQIA pop, coming into a building that historically has been oppositional to them, and finding a place of acceptance. And we don't do religious stuff in our practice, but for many of our clients, just coming into the building again has been a way to kind of get past some of that religious trauma that they've experienced growing up. I recall a client that I had for a couple of years who was repeatedly taken to his church where they would pray over him, and the damage that it did to him. I mean, there was no denying that he was gay. They would use him because he was a great singer, and so they would use him and allow him to sing. But the moment he got at one church, he got too effeminate, they fired him for doing that, or for being himself. And the religious community has just done an immense amount of harm, I think, over the years, and I think still does. Gainesville is a little unique, but we do have those pockets where they still believe in conversion therapy, like the Ignite Center. I don't know if you're familiar with them, right? So we did a protest at their event that they had. They didn't call it a conversion therapy conference, but the byproduct was they were telling their members and telling their attendees, you need to accept people who are identifying as gay or lesbian, bi, trans. You need to accept them into the community. But the ultimate goal was that they would be redeemed and convert. And for them, that meant leaving that lifestyle. And I hate that term, lifestyle. But that's not the only one. There was another one, there was another one, right, at that little church out in Jonesville. It's a little Baptist church. And they had a conference not too long ago. And we chose to ignore that one because it was such a small church and we didn't want to give them added publicity. But it goes on all over the place. And I think, for folks who are looking to be supportive, it's also being aware that this still happens. And it's not far from where they live right now. And so addressing it locally potentially means that you become more active in protesting, you become more active in being a vocal ally who opposes those sorts of actions. Because I think for those of us who are not in quote unquote marginalized communities, we can use our voice of privilege in a very powerful way, as long as that voice is based off of what the marginalized community needs and wants us to say.
Absolutely. And I also want to give some kudos to Gainesville, because we have a lot of really supportive, really progressive faith communities here as well. And I think that that's important to point out, and important, that if people are looking for a spiritual home or a church or a synagogue, or they want to get involved in a spiritual community, that they keep looking and that they ask those questions and that they, find a place that is going to feel good to them.
Yeah.
I'm active in the United Church of Gainesville.
I was going to say, I send everybody to UCG.
Yeah, I am certainly biased, and that's been really powerful for me, being part of a really affirming, faith community, and a community that is actively involved in LGBT issues.
Sure.
So, I'm certainly not like telling my clients to go to church, but we definitely want people to know that there are faith communities that they can reach out to and become involved
Sure.
in.
And it can be a great system of support. And,
absolutely.
Then you have the Trinity Metropolitan Community Church, which is way out of the country, and I love that congregation. They're unique, little on the older side, but they're unique. I preached there a few weeks ago when Catherine was out of town. So, and then you've got also the Methodist Church downtown, First United Methodist, and they've got their whole bit going on in their denomination about splitting and that sort of stuff. But they have taken a stand there, and I think when I drove by last week, the week before, they actually had a pride flag flying out.
That's awesome.
And so they went through a huge struggle to discern that they wanted to be a very welcoming and accepting congregation. But so there are lots of faith communities that are there. The synagogue also is very supportive. And then here, I think I told you the Unspoken Treasure Society rents here, and so I get to see Regina all the time. And
she's awesome.
She is awesome. She's loud. I keep telling her, there's 10 volumes and you're at volume 9.5. Can you turn it down to like a 5? She goes, no, I have 1 volume and that's it. I'm like, okay. But she does a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of work within the community. So being a part of a community doesn't necessarily, it's not about always the religion. Sometimes it's just about being around supportive people.
Absolutely.
And that can be healing in and of itself. But there are certain questions that if you're interested, we can help you with the questions to ask to discern whether or not the community is welcoming and open, because most of them will say, we love all people, but in reality, they love the version that they're going to try to create you to be, rather than who you are as a person. So I think that's a big piece. Earlier this week, we did a podcast on eating disorders.
Oh, interesting. Very important topic.
It is, and intuitive eating. I learned that term. I didn't know that before. So one of the issues we talked about there was body image issues within the LGBTQIA, particularly the gay and bi male population, and the challenges that are faced by that population, and the media portion, which kind of portrays that, to be a perfect gay guy or bi guy, you have to have like this 24-pack abs and muscles and in shape. And do you find that that's still a concern for gay and bi men in particular?
I don't know that I can specifically speak to gay and bi men. In working with a lot of trans people, we talk a lot about body image and where body image and dysphoria intersect, and that definitely that is very common. Eating disorders are pretty common for trans people compared to the general population, and so that can be a real challenge for people, especially if living in your body is uncomfortable because of dysphoria and because of transphobia. It's hard to, get out there and exercise and move your body in ways that feel good. It's hard to inhabit your body safely and comfortably. So that's something that we talk about in therapy sometimes is, what can you do? How can you live in your body? How can you get some fresh air? And how can you work on, being the healthiest version of yourself that you can.
Right. Yeah. Now, do you work with eating disorders?
Not directly. I definitely have had a handful of clients who, bring up having symptoms of an eating disorder, having, been, in eating disorder groups before. It's not a population that I have any specialized knowledge in, but I've found that, applying DBT and CBT kind of principles to that, talking about being mindful, talking about understanding, your body's cues and how you're feeling, really goes a long way.
Yeah. So, I think I told you, my ADHD brain kicks in. So, the transitional piece, right, is I think sometimes people have a particular definition of transition that exists. I think the general population thinks that if you're going to be trans, you have to make a full transition, whatever that means. I don't know what that really means because I never ask how they define it, but what does transition mean?
Yeah, so transition, you're right, can mean a lot of different things. And sometimes people use different terms. Sometimes people refer to gender affirming care, gender affirming healthcare. I personally like the word transition. I think it really conveys what a person is going through, which is a major change or a shift. So transition can mean anything that somebody does to affirm their gender identity. It might be, changing their name, whether legally or informally, using different pronouns, experimenting with different outfits, taking hormone medication, taking puberty blockers, for younger trans people, having surgery, changing your identity documents, and, people definitely, in the past, there's been a lot of gatekeeping around, and insurance will only cover surgery. If you've been on this amount of hormones for this long, if you've taken these steps to legally transition, when that's not in line with people's actual goals, that's not in line with what's realistic for people. And so, people will often prioritize what is most important for them. Which, for a lot of people, having surgeries, particularly having top surgery, can be a priority before starting hormones. A person might want to, be on hormones for a while before they start coming out to others. So a big part of, of being in therapy for trans people, if they're trying to sort that out, is talking through, what are your options, what are your goals, what's most important to you, what's safest, what's financially accessible, and sort of making a plan. Because it's, it can be expensive.
Yes.
Simply changing your name costs at least $400. And so, people make decisions based on what's most important to them. But it's stressful and it's scary to walk around not looking like the person on your driver's license. Or having, a driver's license that says one name, but a passport that says another. It's easy, when you're dealing with the legal system, to sort of fall into a limbo where the name on some of your stuff doesn't match up, and that can cause a lot of that additional stress that trans people face. And the fear of, being discriminated against, being denied services or being denied treatment, having treatment not paid for because of some sort of paperwork issue. So I do my best to help clients sort of plan out and sort out, if they're transitioning, what that looks like for them. And I really do my best to share community resources as well. The Southern Legal Council is a great resource for people who are changing their names. We've got some great primary care doctors here in Gainesville who prescribe HRT, which I think is great. If you can find a doctor that you trust who's willing to do that, it's nice to have one person that you go to. Shout out to my doctor, Dr. Danielle Nelson, who's a true angel. And working with a lot of young people, some of them are just sorting out stuff on their own for the first time, so helping them to have realistic expectations, understand, how to make a doctor's appointment, how to follow up, how to pick up your prescriptions from the pharmacy, walking them through developing those independent skills.
No, that's great. I think with my clients, I do pretty much the same thing, which is, this is your journey. So let's create that map that's going to work for you. And I always highlight the fact that your map is going to look different from somebody else's map. And so we don't want to compare, our transitional process and our journey, because it's you and you're developing you. And the body image does come into play quite frequently. And the challenges that have faced the trans community, particularly with whether it's transitioning, whether you're born male and transitioning to female, historically they would have these parties where they would do injections in their breasts to do that, and the dangers, the lengths to which people are willing to go sometimes can take them to some very dangerous places in that transition. And so I always encourage them and tell them, please don't do those parties. Let's focus on what's available medically and safely, because if you take that shortcut at the party, it may feel good in the moment, but the byproduct is down the road, you're going to have some significant health complications.
Yeah.
And I know there was a lady in Orlando that was notorious for doing these injection parties, and the number of trans women who now are suffering the consequences is just phenomenal. And so that's the other part that I tell them is stick with a doctor who has an MD behind their name, or the consequences can be significant. So.
Yeah, and another great resource is Planned Parenthood. They prescribe HRT, they can do virtual visits. And everyone I know who's gone to Planned Parenthood for any form of healthcare had an amazing experience.
Right.
And so for people who don't have insurance or don't want to use their insurance because maybe they're still on a family member's insurance, you can certainly reach out to Planned Parenthood. They do a great job.
They do.
They rock.
They do rock, and they get a bad rep, right? Because anyway, I'm not going to go down that road today, but the Planned Parenthood does a phenomenal job and does wonderful medical care for males, females, whatever. I mean, everybody is served. It doesn't matter. And they have a broad range of services.
Yeah.
And I don't think that gets out in public enough.
Right, yeah, people don't realize that.
Yeah, so as we continue to work for, kind of helping the trans community, the LGBTQIA community, what are some wonderful tools that might be available to those of us who are allies, not really part of the community, but we're allies? How can we best support the community?
Excellent question. So you mentioned Equality Florida before. I think they're a great source of information for people who want to learn more about what's going on throughout our state related to LGBT issues. Getting involved with a group like PFLAG is a great place to start. And reading about queer and trans history. I think it is easy for people outside the community to think these are new issues. Sure. Or new identities, when in fact, learning the history, I think, is really exciting and really puts what's going on now into context. If you know a trans person that doesn't have a lot of money, pay for their hormones.
Yes.
So definitely, supporting causes financially. Southern Legal Council, they do a lot of great work. Equality Florida, Lambda Legal, there's a lot of organizations that you can donate to if you have the resources to do that, to be, financially supporting the folks that are on the ground and in the courtroom.
Yeah. So I also work with the Human Rights Coalition, not the Human Rights Council, slight variation. And we do a community ID. That's what we're most
awesome.
And we have found a way that we can still, because our ID has to be in a specific format so that the police will accept it. And so, but we have found a way to work with the trans population so that we can have their chosen name, as well as we have to have the name that's officially on their birth certificate that's there. We have to have that. We would rather not, but we have to. So if folks are looking for a valid ID, an ID that tends to be accepted throughout Gainesville and Alachua County, the HRC does do that. So we do community drives. We have one coming up on Saturday that folks can set up appointments for, or they can just go to hrcalachua.com
Awesome.
and set up an appointment there. So that's another resource that's available. So as we go forward, the allies can best be supported by connecting with these organizations and use our money, use our voices, use our person. To walk with folks, and also to attend to the political struggle which is taking place, so that we're not silent on the issue.
Yeah.
because when our friends are suffering, we're suffering along with them, a little bit differently, but we're still suffering. So that's good. So once again, if somebody wants to get in contact with you and set up an appointment, how do they do that? They send you an email at ezra.stone@gmail.com.
ezrastone.lcsw@gmail.com. And if you Google my name, you should find my website. There's not a lot of other Ezra Stones that are currently alive and active on the internet. So you can definitely reach out. There is a really high need for trans-competent therapy. I'm usually pretty busy. But if you email me and I don't have any openings, I can certainly help people find a counselor, find community resources, find things that are going on locally if it's a person that's in the Gainesville community. And that's another great thing about my Rainbow Resilience group and about some of these other groups in the community. If you can't afford therapy or you can't find a therapist or you just, need a little engine tune-up once a month.
Right.
It's really great to have these places that you can go and connect with people and share coping skills and feel a little bit less alone.
Yeah. And the Pride Center is, they have the drop-in hours, but do they have regular hours that they're open?
Right now, they're open during those drop-in hours, and then when there's one of those events that we talked about, they are going to be expanding the hours that they're open when people can just stop by, I think, early next year. So for the most updated information about the Pride Center, you can go to GainesvillePride.org. They've got an email list that they send out every so often with lists of all the meetings and events that are coming up, on Instagram or Facebook. So that's a great way to stay on top of what the Pride Center is doing, and also they promote other, events and stuff that are going on in the community.
Fantastic.
So yeah, definitely stay in touch and keep an eye on the internet and get involved.
That's right. Well, anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure we chat about?
I would say that, I guess the last thing that I would say is just that even when it's bad out there, and especially when it's bad out there, it's important to take care of yourself. And so, we talk about that a lot in therapy, trying to get enough sleep, drink enough water, eat your vegetables, go get some fresh air.
Vegetables, really?
And, and it's easy to get caught up in the thought of everything's so fucked, I can't do that.
Right.
It's like when everything's fucked, that's when you need to do it the most.
It's the simple things that really matter a lot, right? And it's staying in a structure and staying on schedule.
Absolutely.
Right, because when you don't have that, you don't have your own map.
Right. And, I think often on the internet, people will be like, oh, you're depressed, just go take a walk. And that sounds very silly and dismissive, but honestly, we say the same thing in therapy.
Yes.
It's like you need to go get some fresh air, you need to drink a glass of water, you need to go to bed. And so just, remembering to take care of ourselves, especially when we're feeling stressed and burned out and overwhelmed by the world.
Focus on the things you can change and have control over.
Absolutely.
And identify the things long-term that we can work on together.
Absolutely.
So,
easier said than done, though.
It is. And I say that to my clients. And they have this phrase. A lot of my clients have this phrase now that they say, what would Larry say? Because I know what I'm going to tell them all the time, because I'm like a broken record. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you exercising? Are you doing the things that you need to do?
Are you trying to control someone else's behavior? Yeah.
Yep. So anyway, well, I appreciate you being here. It was a pleasure to have you. A pleasure to meet you, and I hope we'll continue the conversation and collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. It was really nice to meet you, and I appreciate you having me on.
Well, anytime. And again, I'm Larry, and I am the clinical director, executive director, and trash taker-outer here at the I don't take out the trash anymore, I used to. At the Gainesville Community Counseling Center. You can find us online at www.gainesvillecounselingcenter.com, or you can call us at 352-448-9120. And that, my friends, ends our podcast of Welcome to the New You. Peace.